At 1446 on the Kursk frontier, in a sector of the border war where broken bridges and tree cover have become as decisive as artillery and armor, a Ukrainian first-person view strike drone slammed into a Russian ammunition truck in the middle of a convoy crossing a half-destroyed bridge, triggering a chain of explosions that, according to the battlefield account, destroyed the crossing, engulfed the column in fire, and sent men, vehicles, and equipment into the river below. What lasted only seconds at the point of impact was, in fact, the final act of a much longer engagement fought not only over concrete and steel, but across the invisible layers of the electromagnetic spectrum. Reconnaissance, jamming, signal discipline, machine-assisted flight correction, and split-second decisions by operators several kilometers away all converged in a strike that, by this account, turned a narrow crossing into a deadly choke point and offered a stark illustration of how modern combat is being reshaped by small, low-cost, unmanned systems operating against heavier, conventional forces. The reported target was a Russian convoy moving across a fractured bridge near the border area of Kursk. The column was said to include one 152mm howitzer, 3 Tiger armored escort vehicles, an ammunition truck carrying artillery shells beneath canvas cover, and a number of soldiers on foot advancing cautiously across a structure described as half rebuilt and half ruined. That condition made the bridge both a necessity and a vulnerability. It was carrying the full weight of the convoy, while already structurally compromised, narrowing the space for maneuver and reducing any chance of dispersal if the column came under attack. In battlefield terms, it was the kind of choke point commanders try to secure quickly and opponents try to exploit without delay. By the time the strike drone appeared over the deck, the battle had already been underway for at least 16 minutes. According to the account, the first stage began at 1430, when a Ukrainian Shark D-2 reconnaissance drone was flying roughly 1.2 kilometers above the borderlands, and identified what its operators saw as a metallic glimmer below. Through its optics, the crew is said to have confirmed the Russian convoy creeping over the damaged bridge, the howitzer, armored escorts, soldiers on foot, and the ammunition truck that would later become the decisive target. But spotting the convoy was only the beginning. Every second of live video transmission from the reconnaissance drone also created risk for the Ukrainian crew, because the longer the drone remained active on a detectable signal, the greater the chance that Russian counter-detection systems would identify the operator's position and direct fire or intercept assets toward them. The threat described in the account was a Russian Zu-Park-M counter-battery radar, a system originally designed to track artillery rounds in flight, calculate their trajectories, and help direct return fire within a matter of minutes. Here, however, the system is described as having been adapted with upgraded software and field-deployed artificial intelligence to assist in locating drone operators through signal triangulation. The Ukrainian team, according to the narrative, understood that remaining on one frequency for more than 4 minutes and 10 seconds significantly increased the chance of being detected and targeted. That calculation drove the tactical choices that followed. Rather than maintain a continuous transmission, the crew reportedly shifted to rapid frequency hopping across 132 channels, broadcasting only in short bursts and going dark in between. To an outside observer, the pattern might have looked chaotic. To those controlling the drones, it was deliberate, a means of staying in the fight without becoming a fixed point on the enemy's electronic map. At 1438, another threat emerged. Thermal sensors reportedly detected an incoming Russian Orlan-20 reconnaissance drone approaching from the north and scanning for heat signatures on the ground. Faced with the danger of aerial detection, the Ukrainian operators are said to have taken physical concealment measures, as well as electronic ones, covering themselves with thermal shielding blankets and reducing their visibility while trying to preserve the final link in the targeting chain. Before going dark, the pilot reportedly transmitted one last encrypted ping on 446 MHz, a civilian band more commonly associated with commercial and hobby use than frontline combat. The message, according to the account, carried coordinates, wind, convoy speed, and a warning. The target was protected by multiple layers of defense, and the strike unit should expect the worst. That short transmission became the bridge between reconnaissance and attack. By 1440, the battle had shifted decisively into the realm of electronic warfare. The Russian Zu-Park-M radar was reportedly working in coordination with a Pol-21 jamming array mounted on a mobile mast around 5 kilometers away, together creating what the Ukrainian side described as a dome of interference, extending roughly 1.5 kilometers. The effect on the reconnaissance feed was immediate. Colors warped, frames froze, the horizon bent under static, and signal attenuation reached a level said to be powerful enough to crush satellite uplinks and render direct manual control unreliable. The convoy below, meanwhile, continued to move at approximately 14 kilometers an hour, slowly enough to remain exposed, yet steadily enough to threaten completion of the crossing if the strike team could not act in time. With latency rising to a level incompatible with precision piloting, the Ukrainian side reportedly switched from direct control to dead reckoning prediction. The last known coordinates, speed, and direction of the convoy were used to estimate its future position at half-second intervals. Even then, passing that information to the strike team created its own danger. A normal radio transmission, especially under active surveillance by Russian electronic warfare assets, risked exposing the sender. The response, according to the account, was to compress the essential targeting data into a single 320-byte packet, encrypt it with a civilian-grade mixing key, and transmit it in just 0.28 seconds on 446.1 MHz at low power. The transmission was brief, weak, and intended to disappear into background electromagnetic noise. Yet, it was enough. 4 kilometers away, a strike drone was prepared for launch. At 14:42, that second drone lifted off from a camouflaged clearing east of the front line. Small in frame, but heavily tasked, it was described as a 7.5-inch carbon fiber FPV platform, powered at 17.2 volts, with a total endurance of just over 8 minutes, and armed with a 2.1 kilogram explosively formed penetrator, or shaped charge warhead, intended to breach armor and ignite ammunition carried inside or behind protective plating. The operator, identified by the call sign Falcon 9, reportedly took the drone into manual mode and sent it west toward the bridge, straight into one of the most heavily contested electronic environments on the battlefield. For the first stretch of flight, the drone used terrain masking at very low altitude, hugging cover behind damaged buildings and maintaining a high forward speed. But as it approached the target area, the electronic picture deteriorated sharply. At roughly 1.9 kilometers from the bridge, the video feed began to collapse under the effect of a Russian jammer described as a Repellent 2 system positioned near the crossing. The image broke into static, transmission delay increased from fractions of a second to more than 2 seconds, and the strike drone entered what the operators regarded as a digital storm. The account describes directed noise powerful enough to overwhelm electronics and a jammer antenna array radiating heat detectable by onboard sensors. Then the screen went black. For 37 seconds, the drone reportedly flew blind, guided not by live video, but by inertial navigation, gyroscopic compensation, and onboard estimation of position and heading. No battlefield sequence captures more clearly the dependence of modern drones on the integration of human intent and machine autonomy. The operator could set the mission and commit to the attack, but in those seconds, the aircraft itself had to survive a world in which its eyes had been temporarily shut. At 740 meters from the target, the camera returned for a single frame. The image reportedly showed only a steel beam catching sunlight and the convoy halfway across the bridge. It was enough for the system to update its trajectory. The warhead fuse was armed, the line of attack refined, and the drone accelerated. But one final layer of Russian defense still remained between the strike aircraft and the convoy. Waiting above the bridge, according to the account, was an interceptor drone deployed specifically to stop incoming Ukrainian FPV platforms before they could reach their targets. At 14:44, the two drones met over the crossing. One was built to kill the convoy, the other was built to kill the attacker. The Russian interceptor M is described as diving from 28 meters altitude at high rotor speed in a steep angle, carrying no warhead and relying instead on speed and impact geometry to disable or destroy the oncoming drone. The Ukrainian platform, burdened by its 2.1 kilogram charge, was slower in level flight and at a disadvantage in any straightforward chase. Closing speed was reported at 274 kilometers an hour, leaving less than 4 seconds to react. Falcon 9 responded with an aggressive evasive turn, pulling the strike drone sharply left and forcing its lightweight carbon frame to absorb enormous stress. Motor temperature climbed, the airframe flexed, and the interceptor missed by less than 2 meters. The engagement then became a contest not only of piloting skill, but of battery life, momentum, and angles. Both drones were bleeding power. The Russian interceptor climbed for another pass, intending to trade altitude for speed in a second dive. In response, the Ukrainian pilot made a decision described in the account as unthinkable but decisive. He cut throttle entirely. The strike drone dropped from 12 meters to 2 in less than 2 seconds, free-falling until the interceptor committed to empty air and overshot again. Then, just above ground level, Falcon 9 re-engaged power, catching airflow before impact and stabilizing a machine already close to its performance limit. What followed was described as a low-altitude turning fight, both drones circling, slowing, and searching for a lethal angle. Finally, the Ukrainian drone climbed vertically, stalled at the apex, spun, and dropped nose first. The Russian operator, the account says, was momentarily blinded by sunlight reflecting off the water below. The interceptor crossed underneath, and the strike drone broke free toward the bridge with roughly 30% battery remaining. By 1446, the aircraft emerged from the interference field damaged, short on power, and still under fire. The battery was reportedly down to 12.6 volts. The drone was scarred, operating with severe system degradation, and closing on a convoy whose escorts had now heard the aerial fight and understood that an attack was imminent. 3 Russian soldiers on the bridge raised their rifles toward the approaching threat. At 240 meters, the first burst of 5.45mm gunfire hit the drone. A bullet pierced the rear motor and power levels dropped again. The onboard flight controller responded instantly, redistributing thrust and making thousands of rapid micro-corrections each second in an attempt to keep the machine level despite asymmetric damage. It was no longer a clean attack run. It was a wounded aircraft trying to remain airborne long enough to complete its mission. At 90 meters, another defender fired a Saiga 12 shotgun. Steel pellets spread through the air toward the oncoming drone. Most missed, but at least 2 rounds reportedly struck home. One cracked the camera lens and blinded half the feed. Another punctured the lithium battery pack, venting white vapor and signaling critical damage to the power source. Speed dropped. Altitude was barely above a meter. Manual recovery under those conditions would normally be almost impossible. But at that point, according to the account, the drone's onboard systems shifted to a proximity mode, using magnetic signatures from the convoy's steel mass to refine the final line of attack. At 17 meters, the warhead was armed. At 9 meters, available thrust had fallen to 38%. The aircraft was effectively dying in the last seconds before impact. Then came the strike itself. The narrative places impact at 1447, with the shaped penetrator punching into the ammunition truck and triggering sympathetic detonation among multiple 152mm artillery shells. The result, according to the account, was immediate and catastrophic. The truck was lifted from the bridge, the central structure failed, and within seconds the entire column, truck, artillery piece, escort vehicles, and crew was engulfed in fire and collapsing steel. The bridge, already damaged before the attack, disintegrated in a rolling wave of explosions and debris. From above, the Shark D-2 reconnaissance drone, still in position after the attack, reportedly recorded towering smoke columns, steam rising from the river, and surviving Russian soldiers staring at the space where the crossing had existed only moments earlier. The sequence presented in this battlefield retelling is dramatic, but its military significance lies less in the spectacle of destruction than in the layered process behind it. A damaged bridge was not simply attacked because it was visible. It was selected because it forced a Russian convoy into compression. A reconnaissance drone was not merely observing. It was part of a data chain under continuous threat from radar and aerial search. A strike drone was not simply flown to a target. It had to cross an area saturated with jamming, survive a blackout, defeat an interceptor, absorb small arms fire, continue after battery and motor damage, and rely increasingly on onboard stabilization and target assistance features as human control became harder to sustain. On the Russian side, the account also points to a defense in-depth model. Radar for detection, jammers for denial, reconnaissance drones for thermal search, interceptor drones for aerial defense, and soldiers on the bridge with rifles and shotguns to provide the final layer of protection. Even so, the defense failed at the last instant because the target remained vulnerable and the attacking system remained just capable enough to reach it. What emerges from this account is a picture of warfare in which size and cost no longer map neatly onto battlefield effect. The Russian convoy carried artillery, armored escort vehicles, and what appears to have been a critical ammunition load. The Ukrainian strike system that destroyed it was, by comparison, physically tiny, low-flying, and fragile, vulnerable to weather, interference, gunfire, and battery depletion. Yet precisely because it was small, difficult to track continuously, and integrated into a wider reconnaissance and signal network, it was able to threaten assets far more expensive and far more visible than itself. The asymmetry is one of the defining realities of this war. Heavy equipment still matters, firepower still matters, logistics still matter, but the ability to find, follow, and hit a target with a small, expendable system at exactly the right point in time can now erase a conventional column in under 2 minutes. The account also underscores how contested the airspace just above the front has become. In previous eras, aviation dominance was associated mainly with fighter aircraft, attack helicopters, and long-range air defense systems. Here, the crucial air battle unfolded not at high altitude, but at the level of treetops, rooftops, and bridge decks. Reconnaissance drones, interceptor drones, jamming masts, radar sweeps, and handheld weapons all converged in a slice of sky measured in meters rather than kilometers. Control of that airspace no longer depends only on who has aircraft in the classic sense. It depends on who can sense, jam, adapt, conceal, transmit, predict, and decide faster than the opponent. The operators in this account were not merely pilots. They were signal managers, analysts, tacticians, and at decisive moments, risk calculators choosing whether to stay on the air for another second or disappear before the enemy's systems could lock on. There are also implications for logistics and mobility. A bridge crossing under fire has always been one of the most vulnerable moments for any military formation. What this incident suggests is that the vulnerability is now compounded by the precision and persistence of small unmanned systems. A convoy moving slowly over a damaged structure cannot disperse, cannot accelerate freely, and cannot easily conceal itself. The very act of crossing becomes a timed problem, and each second spent on the bridge increases the chance that a reconnaissance platform, whether already overhead or arriving moments later, will pass targeting data to a strike unit. In that environment, engineering delays, damaged infrastructure, and the inability to rapidly secure electronic cover can become fatal. The account includes one short human moment that stands out amid the technical detail. As the strike drone, already damaged and under fire, closed on the target, the operator reportedly whispered into his microphone, "Hold the line one more second." In a report dominated by voltages, latencies, frequencies, and algorithms, that line captures what remains fundamentally human in drone warfare. Machines can stabilize flight, compensate for drift, and lock a trajectory. They can process signatures, maintain inertial movement in darkness, and execute thousands of corrections per second. But somewhere behind the screens and antennas, a person still decides to launch, to persist, to break radio silence, to risk detection, or to press an attack after the odds appear to have turned. When the smoke cleared over the river, the physical result, according to the account, was stark. Twisted steel, boiling water, a destroyed bridge, and a convoy no longer capable of completing its mission. The immediate consequence would have been the loss of ammunition, artillery mobility, escort vehicles, and trained personnel at a critical crossing point. The wider consequence is interpretive, and it reaches far beyond a single bridge in the cursed borderlands. This account is being presented as evidence of a broader transformation already underway on the battlefields of Eastern Europe. The shift from warfare dominated by mass and armor alone to warfare in which information, timing, software-assisted adaptation, and low-cost precision systems can decide the outcome of an engagement in seconds. That does not mean conventional weapons have become irrelevant. On the contrary, the convoy itself was carrying one of the oldest arbiters of war, artillery. What has changed is the path to destroying such systems before they can be used. A tiny drone, flying at low altitude, surviving only minutes in the air, can now reach a target that once might have required artillery fire, attack aircraft, or special forces. The threshold for delivering battlefield effect has fallen, while the demand for electronic protection, rapid movement, concealment, and decentralized response has risen sharply. Any formation that ignores that reality risks becoming a slow, visible target in a battle space increasingly shaped by sensors and code. In the end, the reported destruction of the Russian convoy on the broken bridge near Kursk is being framed not simply as a successful strike, but as a lesson written in fire across a river crossing. It is a lesson about exposure, about electronic survival, about the fusion of man and machine under pressure, and about the speed at which tactical decisions now unfold. The bridge was gone in moments. The convoy was erased almost as quickly, but the meaning attached to the event is larger than the blast itself. On this battlefield, according to the account, the contest was no longer only between heavier and lighter weapons, or between offense and defense in the traditional sense. It was a contest between detection and concealment, interference and adaptation, seconds lost and seconds saved. And in that contest, on this